He thought the storm had taken everything from him. But when the ground split open on his dying farm, he climbed down into the darkness, and what he found beneath the earth didn't just save his land, it saved the entire valley. Before we begin, hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. Your support helps us create more powerful stories like this one. The storm did not arrive as weather. It arrived as a warning. Mark Hudson felt it long before the first crack of thunder rolled across the dead fields. The sky had darkened too quickly, too completely, swallowing the late afternoon light like a beast inhaling its prey. The air grew thick, heavy with a pressure that made his ears pop and his chest tighten. Even the birds, those few stubborn survivors that still lived in this dying corner of Oregon, vanished, leaving the land wrapped in an eerie, suffocating silence. He stood on the porch of the farmhouse that had belonged to 3 generations of Hudsons, gripping the railing so hard the wood dug into his palms. The bank letter lay on the kitchen table behind him, its red stamp still burning the back of his mind. Final notice. 1 month. That was all they had given him. 30 days to do the impossible. He would have thought about it more, but the wind began to howl, sharp, violent, tearing across the fields like something enraged. He had lived through storms. He had survived droughts, freezes, and the brutal summer of 19. But this was different. The sky over the valley twisted into a snarling bruise of black and green. Lightning forked downward in jagged streaks, illuminating the broken fences and cracked soil in fast, brutal flashes. The old barn swayed under the assault, the roof shuddering as if ready to fly off. Mark cursed under his breath and sprinted across the yard, boots slipping in the gathering mud. He slammed the barn doors shut, securing them with the last unbent piece of iron he had. Inside, the animals stumbled nervously in their pens, their fear vibrating through the walls. "Easy, easy," he muttered, though he knew there was no calming anyone, human or animal, in a storm like this. A bolt of lightning struck so close the ground shook. He felt the vibration climb up his legs, rattling his bones. The earth groaned, something deep beneath it shifting as though something ancient had been stirred awake. He ran back toward the house, rain slashing at his face. The wind ripped the screen door out of his hands, and he had to wrestle it closed before forcing the main door shut. He latched it and collapsed into a chair, chest heaving. The roof boomed as the storm hammered it relentlessly. The lights flickered once, twice, then died. Lantern light danced weakly across the room as he lit the wick with shaking hands. Shadows crawled across the walls. The house moaned with each gust of wind. Mark sat still, listening to the deep rumble of thunder and the sharp, violent snaps of lightning striking somewhere far too close. Hours passed, or minutes. It was impossible to tell. The world outside had been swallowed in chaos, and inside, all he could do was wait. Then suddenly, silence. Not the comforting silence of a passing storm. Something else, something wrong. No wind, no rain, no thunder, just nothing. Mark stood slowly, lantern trembling in his grip. He felt the silence as much as he heard it, a hollow, unsettling emptiness pressing against the walls. The house felt as if it were holding its breath. He cracked the door open. The storm clouds were still there, dark, thick, swirling, but the rain had stopped in an instant, as if someone had turned off a tap. The wind had died equally fast. The air felt unnaturally still. Then he felt it, a faint tremor underfoot. The earth quivered, just once, but enough to make the porch boards creak. Mark stepped outside, scanning the land. His flashlight beam cut across the soaked dirt, glinting off puddles and broken branches. The field stretched out in a distorted landscape of mud and debris. He moved slowly, instinct telling him something had changed, something big. He reached the far edge of the property, near the old pasture, and froze. The ground had opened. A massive, gaping wound split the earth in a jagged circle at least 20 feet across. The edges had caved inward, dirt and clay sliding down into a yawning cavity that swallowed the beam of his flashlight whole. A sinkhole, but not like any he had ever seen. This one felt deliberate, as if the earth had chosen this spot, ripping itself apart from beneath his land. He edged closer, careful, testing each step. Mud crumbled near the rim, dropping silently into the darkness. Mark crouched, angling the flashlight downward. The beam revealed a steep slope of slick rock and torn roots. Water dripped from the sides, echoing faintly in the cavern below. He swallowed, adrenaline flickering through him. If this spread, if the ground here was unstable, his house, his barn, everything could go with it. The fear hit him fast and sharp, but beneath it was something else, something he didn't dare name yet. Curiosity. Slowly, keeping his weight balanced away from the rim, he leaned in farther. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was steady, purposeful, not the scattered trickle of leftover rain. There was water down there, real water. Something cold ran through him, fear, hope, confusion he couldn't tell. All he knew was that he needed to see more. He backed away, breath shaking, and hurried to the barn. There, hanging on the wall, was his father's old rope frayed in spots, but thick, strong enough to hold a grown man. He took it, looped it twice around a sturdy fence post, tested the knot 3 times. Then he returned to the sinkhole. The darkness below waited like an open throat. Mark took one long breath and lowered himself into the earth. The rope burned hot against his palms as he descended. The wall was slick, mud sliding beneath his boots, pebbles tumbling past into the unseen depths. The air grew colder the farther he went, damp and ancient, as though untouched by sunlight for centuries. Halfway down, his boot found a narrow outcropping of rock. He paused, lantern swinging in his hand, its faint glow revealing the contour of the cavern. He looked down. The bottom was only 10 feet further. He let himself down slowly until his boots finally hit soft, wet soil. The cavern was larger than he expected, like a hollow carved into the earth. Water dripped steadily from a fissure in the wall, gathering into a small, trembling pool. He approached it, lantern casting warm light on the stone. A thin ribbon of water flowed from the crack, pure, impossibly clear. He touched it. Ice cold. He tasted it. Clean. Cleaner than any well water he'd had in years. Cleaner than rain after a drought. Cleaner than anything this dying land should have produced. This can't be, he whispered, voice echoing back to him. But it was real. A hidden water source beneath his failing farm. A chance. A lifeline. He stared at the stream, heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The enormity of what he was seeing crashed over him. If this was what he thought it was, it could save everything. His farm, his neighbors' farms, the valley itself. He stayed there for a long time, listening to the steady heartbeat of the earth. Finally, he grabbed the rope and climbed back toward the dim circle of sky. When he pulled himself over the rim, chest heaving, the first faint hint of dawn was breaking over the horizon. The world around him looked the same, wet, battered, broken. But Mark Hudson had seen what lay beneath it, and nothing would ever be the same again. He rose slowly, staring at the sinkhole one last time before turning toward the farmhouse. Behind him, the faint sound of dripping water continued, steady, constant, alive. Ahead of him lay uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, hope came with it. Sleep never truly came to Mark that night. What little rest he managed felt thin and brittle, like old glass ready to shatter at a touch. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image, a thin ribbon of crystal water cutting through solid rock in the dark, dripping with a patient rhythm that sounded more like a promise than a sound. By the time dawn finally pushed its gray light across the fields, his decision was already made. He stood at the kitchen table, staring at the bank letter spread open beside his cold coffee, the red stamp that had burned itself into his thoughts. Final notice seemed almost smaller now, less like a death sentence and more like a deadline. 1 month, 30 days until they came to strip away what was left of his life. Unless he changed the story. His phone lay near the letter, its screen cracked in one corner. For a long moment he simply looked at it, the names in his memory circling in his mind like vultures over a carcass. Then one name rose to the surface. Carter Drilling and Ground Services. Years ago he'd seen their truck on someone else's land, back when wells still meant expansion instead of survival. He hadn't thought about them since. But now, his chest tightened. Calling them meant more than just an inquiry. It meant committing. It meant betting everything he had left on a vein of water he had only seen in a small, dark cavern after a storm. He picked up the phone anyway. His thumb hovered over the call button for several seconds. Then he took a breath, pressed it, and held the phone to his ear. The line rang, once, twice. A woman's voice answered, calm and professional, reciting the name of the company. Mark swallowed. "My name is Mark Hudson. I've got a farm out in the East Valley. I think a storm opened up a sinkhole on my property. There's exposed rock at the bottom, and I found what looks like a steady groundwater flow." He forced his voice not to tremble. "I need someone to come out and take a look, maybe more than that." There was a pause. Keys clacked faintly in the background. The woman asked several questions: location, soil type, depth estimate. Mark answered as best he could, describing the drop, the seep of water, the taste, the consistency. She grew more focused as he spoke. "Hold, please," she said at last. The line went quiet. Mark stared at the sink under the window, where the tap had been more symbolic than useful lately. Outside, the fields lay motionless and colorless beyond the glass, a reminder of every crop that had failed and every dollar that had slipped through his fingers. The line clicked. A man's voice came on deeper, older, used to giving orders without raising it. "Mr. Hudson, this is Daniel Carter. I'm told you've got a collapse and a potential source down there." "Yes, sir." "You realize a site visit alone isn't cheap," the man said without cruelty, just fact. "And any drilling work, if we recommend it, will be a significant investment." "I realize," Mark replied. His fingers tightened around the phone. "Come anyway." Carter was quiet for a moment, weighing something invisible over the line. "We've been tracking water movement in that region for years. Most of it's been bad news. But what you're describing..." A faint change in tone. Not quite hope, not quite skepticism. "We can send a small team out in a few days for an assessment. After that, we'll tell you if it's worth drilling." "And the cost?" Mark asked. Carter named a number that made Mark's stomach dip. Then he added the estimated range for drilling if they proceeded. The figures looked obscene compared to the thinning numbers in Mark's own accounts. Every instinct screamed that it was impossible. But another voice, quieter, older, sounding very much like his father, rose in the back of his mind. "You don't save land like this by playing safe." Mark pressed his eyes shut. "Send the team," he said. "I'll find a way to pay for it." He hung up before he could take the words back. The next days stretched like wire pulled too tight. He worked the way he always did, checking what few animals he still had, doing small repairs, walking the fields. But now every step felt different. There was a hum beneath the surface, a sense of something waiting to be revealed. Each morning and each evening, he went back to the sinkhole. He checked the rope, tested the ground near the rim, listened. The dripping never stopped. He didn't go down again. Not yet. It felt wrong to press his luck before the professionals came, like tugging too hard on a loose thread in a fragile cloth. Instead, he watched from above, the sound of water seeping up from the earth, keeping time with the ticking in his chest. On the fourth day, the drilling truck arrived. He heard it before he saw it. The growl of a heavy diesel engine rolling along the gravel road, rattling the old fence posts. When it pulled into his yard, dust blossomed around it like a tired halo. The rig towered over his own beat-up pickup, all steel and cables and possibility. 2 workers climbed down, followed by the man whose voice he'd heard over the phone. Daniel Carter was older than Mark had imagined, with silver at his temples and skin lined by sun and wind. He shook Mark's hand with a firm, dry grip and eyes that missed very little. "Mr. Hudson," he said, looking past him toward the fields. "Rough years." "That's one way to put it," Mark replied. "Show us the hole." They walked across the yard toward the scar on the land. The closer they came, the more Mark felt the weight of their footsteps. He had lived with this wound for days now, but seeing it through their eyes made it feel new and raw again. Carter and his crew approached the sinkhole with the wary respect of men who had seen the earth do worse. They measured the diameter, checked the stability of the edges, and peered downward with flashlights and instruments. One of the workers whistled softly. "That's a drop, all right." Carter said nothing at first. He watched the trickle of water on the exposed rock below, his gaze narrowing. Then he nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "Looks like you weren't imagining things, Hudson," he said. "This isn't just storm runoff. There's pressure behind that flow." "That means what I think it means," Mark asked carefully. "It means," Carter replied, "there's a chance you're sitting on an aquifer. How big, how stable, how accessible, we don't know yet, but it's enough to justify a drill." The world seemed to tilt under Mark's feet. "So we do it?" he asked, voice quieter than he intended. "It's your call," Carter said. "This isn't a scratch ticket. This is all in. If we go ahead, you'll be in deeper than you already are. But if there's a source down there..." He glanced at the parched fields. This valley used to feed half the county. Places like this don't die quietly. Sometimes they just wait for someone hard-headed enough to keep digging. The choice had already been made the moment Mark tasted that water in the dark. "Do it," he said. "Let's drill." The next morning, the rig was set. They positioned it a safe distance from the unstable edge of the sinkhole, on a patch of ground Carter had tested and retested. Steel pipes lay in neat rows nearby, catching the sun. Hoses coiled like sleeping snakes, waiting to carry away cuttings. The machinery gave off the faint oil and metal scent of serious work. Mark stood a few yards away, arms crossed, trying to steady his breathing. He'd handed over the initial payment by wire transfer the night before, watching the last of his safety drain out of his account. There was no longer a plan B. There was only this. Carter raised his voice over the clank of metal as his men prepared the rig. "We'll be going down in stages. First through loose soil, then clay, then whatever rock formations we hit. If your little seep in the sinkhole is part of a bigger system, we'll find it. But we might have to fight through some stubborn ground first." "I'm used to stubborn ground," Mark said. Carter gave him a brief ghost of a smile and signaled his men. The engine roared fully to life. The drill bit began to turn. The sound was like nothing the valley had heard in years. A harsh, grinding, relentless noise as steel teeth met the earth. Vibrations ran through the ground into Mark's boots. Dust and wet clumps of soil belched from the bore as the drill chewed downward. The hours stretched. At first they moved quickly through the soft layers topsoil that hadn't held real life in years. Then compacted dust turned to mud by the storm. The workers called out measurements, logging depth and material composition. Carter checked gauges and screens in brief, efficient glances. Then, eventually, the tone of the drill changed. A higher-pitched whine cut through the lower growl. "Hit rock!" one of the workers shouted. Carter nodded. "Expected. We'll adjust torque." The drill pressed on. The rig shuddered against the resistance. The engine grew louder, straining. Mark found himself clenching his jaw, as if he could force the bit through sheer will. His heart pounded with each tremor. Minutes blurred into an hour. Another. "Depth," Carter called. The younger worker checked his tablet. "We're past the sinkhole level now, deeper than the cavern floor. Deeper than Mark had gone himself." He stepped closer, unable to help it, watching the lines and hoses quiver with the motion of the hidden teeth eating their way through stone. Then suddenly, there was a sharp jolt. The entire rig bucked. "Kill power!" someone shouted. The drilling stopped. The abrupt silence felt like a slap. "What happened?" Mark demanded, his mouth dry. "Could be a hard strata shift," Carter said calmly, though his eyes were alert. "Could be we've hit a denser layer than expected. Could be we've wedged on something we don't want to be wedged on." "Like what?" Mark asked. "Like a formation that doesn't want us passing through," Carter replied. "Or a cavity too unstable to drill into." The words hammered into Mark's chest. They tested the equipment, ran quick diagnostics, adjusted angles by fractions of degrees. Carter conferred quietly with his men. Mark couldn't make out their words, but he could read the tense set of their shoulders. "Can you keep going?" he finally asked. Carter looked at him. "We can try," he said. "But this is the part where a lot of people cut their losses." Mark thought of the letter on his table, of the empty barn, of the years of dust and failed harvests. Losses had been his only constant. He shook his head. "I'm not a lot of people, Mr. Carter." "Push it." A beat. Then Carter nodded, turned to his crew and barked a command. The drill started up again. This time the sound was different, more strained, almost angry. The rig shuddered and groaned as it forced the bit against whatever obstacle lay below. The pressure gauges climbed, flirting with red lines. One worker hovered near an emergency cutoff switch, jaw tight. The ground trembled under Mark's feet. He felt like he was standing on the chest of a giant, hearing its lungs protest. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. "Come on, come on." The minutes dragged like hours. Then, all at once, the resistance broke. The rig lurched forward with a hollow bang. The pressure gauges dropped, then surged in the opposite direction. "Back off a hair!" Carter shouted. The drill eased as his crew adjusted controls. A new sound emerged beneath the grinding. A low, deep hiss. Something was pressing upward. "Everyone step back," one of the workers yelled, waving an arm. Mark found himself moving backward without remembering the steps. The rig vibrated with a strange energy. Then, with a choked sputter, something erupted from the casing pipe. At first it was mud dark, thick, churning. It spat onto the prepared containment pit, splashing the workers' boots, staining the fresh dirt. The pump whined, adjusting to the new flow. Then the mud began to clear. Brown faded to cloudy gray. Gray shifted toward pale. The choked stream became a surge. Water burst from the pipe in a gushing arc, strong enough to slam into the containment area and splash high. The sound of it, a full, relentless rush, washed over the yard. The workers let out whoops and curses that sounded suspiciously joyful. One of them clapped another on the back hard enough to stagger him. Even Carter, usually reserved, allowed himself a small, satisfied exhale. Mark didn't cheer. He couldn't. His entire being had narrowed to the sight and sound of that water. He stepped closer, slowly, like a man approaching something sacred. Droplets spattered his jeans, his boots, his hands. He reached out without realizing it, fingers cupped. The water hit his palm, cold as stone shadow. He brought it to his lips. It tasted like the underground had opened its throat just for him, clean, pure, alive in a way water hadn't been in this valley for a long time. His chest tightened, his eyes burned. Is it real? He managed, voice breaking. Carter was already making measurements, eyes on his instruments. Pressure's strong, he said. Consistent readings. This isn't a shallow pocket, it's a reservoir. You're not dreaming, Hudson. You've got a source. Mark let out a shaky breath that almost turned into a laugh. He pressed a muddy hand over his mouth, shoulders shaking, not from fear this time, but from a release so intense it bordered on pain. The rig continued to roar. The water continued to come. Over the next hours, Carter's crew worked to stabilize the well. They set casing, sealed it properly, and adjusted the flow into temporary channels that Mark had helped dig alongside them. The more the water ran, the clearer it got, until it shimmered in the sunlight like a living ribbon. By late afternoon, the first improvised irrigation line was in place. It wasn't much, just a temporary pipe leading from the containment area to one of the nearest fields, but it was enough. Mark watched the first stream flow from the open end, arcing through the air before splashing onto soil that had been bone dry for years. The dirt darkened instantly, drinking greedily. Small rivulets carved paths into cracks that had once seemed carved in stone. The air filled with a scent he had almost forgotten. Wet earth. Real wet earth. He walked alongside the growing patch of moisture, boots squelching, hand trailing in the cool water. The field looked small and insignificant compared to all that still lay barren around it. But his heart hammered, as if he were witnessing a miracle. Because he was. By the time the crew packed up their equipment for the day, the sun was slanting low, painting the valley in gold. The rig would leave in the morning, Carter said, but they would be back soon to install a more permanent system once the cooperative details, if any, were sorted out. Use it, Carter told him before climbing into his truck. But don't waste it, and don't let anyone talk you into thinking it's theirs just because they showed up with a brochure. What makes you think someone will? Mark asked. Carter gave the fields a long look. Because water like this, he said quietly, doesn't stay secret. Not for long. He drove off, leaving that warning hanging in the cooling air. Mark stood alone for a while, listening to the hiss and splash of his newborn lifeline. The temporary pump hummed beside the wellhead, steady and sure. Water flowed through the pipe, out over the field, into the earth. He didn't realize how long he'd been standing there until the sound of an engine drifted across the late-day quiet. He turned. A battered pickup truck rattled up the old road, coughing dust from its tailpipe. It pulled into his yard and came to a stop near the edge of the newly wet field. The driver's door creaked open. Richard Lane climbed out, hat in hand, shoulders sagging with the posture of a man who had been walking uphill for years without rest. Mark hadn't seen Richard in months, not properly. They'd waved from a distance a few times, each two wrapped in his own struggle to cross the space between their worries. Now, that space closed. Richard's gaze flicked from the pump to the pipe to the glistening dark patch of soil. His throat worked, but for a moment no words came out. When they finally did, they were rough. "Heard you hit something," he said. "Word travels fast in a dry place." Mark nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious amid the mud and makeshift equipment. "We did. It's real, Richard." Another long look, This one full of things neither man wanted to name: envy, disbelief, hope that hurt to feel. "My cattle are down to their last tolerable days," Richard said quietly. "Creek's gone on my side. The well's pumping mud. I wouldn't be here if there was any other way to say this." He hesitated, jaw tightening. "Think you could spare a few barrels?" he asked. "Just enough to keep them standing a little longer." There was no calculation in the question, only desperation hidden behind pride. Mark didn't even need to think. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, we can do that." By sunset, Richard's dented water tank was positioned not far from the containment area. They rigged a temporary hose, and Mark watched as the clear stream filled the tank slowly, rise by careful rise. Richard stood nearby, hands on his hips, staring at the water like a man looking at a miracle he wasn't sure he deserved. "You'll pay me back by not letting them die," Mark said when Richard started to mumble apologies about money. Richard's eyes shone faintly in the fading light. "You always were more stubborn than smart," he muttered. It sounded suspiciously like gratitude. They shared a brief, tired smile. The next day, another truck came, then two more. A battered old flatbed with 3 rusted drums tied down with fraying rope. A small pickup with plastic barrels rolling in the back. A neighbor Mark barely knew pulled up and couldn't quite make himself ask out loud. His eyes did it for him. Mark gave what he could. They set up a rough system, a line of waiting tanks and vehicles. People made excuses. They'd been just passing through, curious, wanted to check on him. But beneath the words, the truth was the same. They were dying without water. Each time a tank filled and rolled away down the dirt road, leaving tracks in the dust, something inside Mark settled and tightened at once. He was giving away part of his lifeline. But he was also sharing something that felt too big to belong to him alone. In the evening, when the last truck had gone and the pump still hummed, he found himself sitting on an overturned bucket near the well, watching the flow. Richard came back that night, not for more water, but for conversation. He sat down beside Mark, groaning as his knees bent. "You know this won't stay simple," Richard said, staring out at the glistening patch of field. "First it's neighbors with barrels, then it's people with contracts." "I know," Mark replied. Silence settled between them. The sky burned orange and then bled into purple as the sun slipped behind the hills. "You ever think about making this official?" Richard asked at last. "Not just you giving what you can. Something bigger, shared, protected." "A cooperative," Mark said. The word felt heavy, loaded with history and possibility. Richard shrugged. "Call it whatever you want, but if this is going to save more than one farm, it shouldn't rest on one man's shoulders. Or one man's pocket. We all break alone. Maybe we stand together." Mark listened to the pump, to the water, to the quiet between their breaths. He thought of the bank letter, of Carter's warning, of the trucks that had lined up like a silent plea. "Maybe," he said slowly, "we should talk to the others." "Yeah," Richard replied. "Maybe we should." They sat there a while longer, 2 silhouettes outlined against the last light of the day, with the sound of water between them. The well kept flowing, steady and sure. And from that simple flow, the first shape of something larger began to form. Not just survival, but a shared future, beating like a new pulse under the revived earth. The valley had taken its first drink. Next, it would learn how to live again. Word about the well did not spread. It erupted. By the end of the week, it wasn't just neighbors who knew. People from farms 10, 20, even 30 miles away had heard that on a dying piece of land in the East Valley, a stream of clean, cold water was flowing out of the earth as if the land itself had remembered how to breathe again. But the sudden attention didn't turn Mark arrogant. If anything, it made him quieter, more focused, more aware of how fragile this miracle was. With each passing day, he felt the same tension he had felt while climbing out of the sinkhole that first night, the sense that, at any moment, everything could still collapse. Yet hope has a way of pulling people together long before it stabilizes anything. And soon, the valley farmers began gathering on Mark's land in the evenings after the day's haul of water. They talked while leaning on barrels, while checking pumps, while sharing exhausted looks that slowly transformed into something steadier. Richard Lane was the first to speak what everyone else had been circling around. "We can't keep doing this halfway," he said one twilight as trucks idled in a loose line. "We need a system, a real one." He looked around at the others, men and women whose hands were cracked from years of work, whose brows carried stories of too many failed seasons. "If we want this water to last, we can't be fighting over it. We need to manage it. Together." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. "It means rules," someone added. "Limits, cooperation." "And paperwork," another muttered. "Plenty of that." "It's either that," Richard said, "or we watch each other die farm by farm." Eyes turned to Mark. He hadn't sought leadership, but leadership had arrived and sat itself at his table like a determined guest. "This well isn't mine alone," he said quietly. "It came from under my land, sure, but what good is saving one farm in a valley full of dying ones? If we're doing this, we do it right. We form a cooperative, share decisions, share responsibility, protect the source instead of draining it dry." The group absorbed his words. Heads nodded slowly, then more firmly. And so the valley's water cooperative was born, not in an office or a courthouse or under the eye of officials, but on a patch of damp earth near Mark's first irrigation pipe, under a sky still bruised from long years of drought. The next days were filled with motion. Old maps of the valley were dug out from garages and barns. Soil charts were borrowed from a former agricultural teacher. Carter's company provided guidance on flow rates and safe extraction levels. Volunteers laid temporary pipes across boundaries that had once separated neighbors, but now tied them together like veins in a single body. Mark's field, the first to feel the revival, became a testing ground. Where water touched, the soil loosened, the color deepened, even the air smelled different. Still, behind the rising hope, signs of strain began to appear. It started with small things. A fence cut in the night near Tom Whitaker's place. No theft, no vandalism except the severed wire. A reserve barrel that had been sitting full behind Janice Mendez's shed suddenly overturned, spilling precious water into dust. A rumor, whispered, hesitant, that someone had been seen near the pump after midnight, carrying something metallic. The cooperative members spoke about it carefully, with lowered voices, not wanting to believe the rot was coming from within. "It's probably nothing," Richard said one evening, wiping sweat from his brow. "Kids, coyotes, accidents." But the set of his jaw told Mark he didn't fully believe his own reassurances. Trouble, however, rarely announces itself with subtle hints for long. Late on a Tuesday afternoon, a convoy of 3 black SUVs rolled up Mark's gravel drive. They moved slowly, deliberately, their polished sides reflecting the harsh sunlight like dark mirrors. Mark was at the wellhead when he noticed the dust rising. He shielded his eyes and watched the vehicles advance, each tire crunching the gravel with a steady, controlled weight. "They're not from around here," Richard muttered beside him. When the SUVs came to a stop, the doors opened in almost perfect synchronization, like a rehearsed scene. 3 men and 1 woman stepped out, all wearing tailored suits that did not belong in a valley where boots and denim were as essential as air. The woman walked ahead of the others with confident, quiet authority. Her heels sank only slightly into the dirt. "Mr. Hudson?" she asked, offering a hand she clearly did not expect him to shake. "I'm Evelyn Cole. I represent Clearflow Industries." Mark wiped his hands on his jeans, but did not take hers. "You're a long way from your headquarters." "We go where the needs are," she said smoothly. "And we've heard your valley has needs." Her eyes flicked toward the steady stream of water pumping, taking everything in with a sharpness that made Mark uneasy. Behind her, one of the men began taking photographs of the wellhead, of the pipes, of the line of water tanks waiting in the field. "What do you want?" Richard asked bluntly. Cole smiled politely, the kind of smile that knew it didn't need to be liked. "Mr. Hudson has discovered a valuable resource," she said. "And valuable resources require proper management, liability structures, environmental assessments, distribution frameworks." She paused delicately. "Protection." Mark's jaw tightened. "We're handling it ourselves." She tilted her head as though humoring a child. "A community cooperative? That's quaint." "Truly. But water rights in this state are complicated. Ownership is not always determined by whose land it appears under." "You're not taking our water," Richard said sharply. Her lashes lowered a fraction. "We are offering a partnership. Clearflow is prepared to purchase this land and all associated rights for a very generous amount." She named a figure that made several of the farmers behind Mark inhale sharply. "And we will handle all distribution to the valley at stable, predictable rates." Mark stared at her. "You want to buy the well, not the land, the well." "We want to ensure it is used efficiently and legally," she said with poised clarity. "Your valley has been struggling for years, Mr. Hudson. Let us relieve you of the burden of unrealistic expectations." The words struck like a cold blade. Mark stepped forward until he stood only a few feet from her. The hum of the pump filled the silence between them. "This water," he said evenly, "is not leaving our control." Cole regarded him with a mixture of amusement and pity. "Men with less to lose than you have refused offers like this. None of them ended well." A faint unease stirred among the farmers behind Mark. She reached into her folder, withdrew a sleek stack of printed contracts, and offered it to him. "Look it over," she said. "You'll see it's in everyone's best interest." Mark did not take the papers. "Leave," he said. Cole's smile dimmed, only slightly. "You're making the wrong decision." "Leave," he repeated. For a moment, no one moved. Then she slipped the papers back into her folder and gestured to her team. "Let's go. We'll be in touch, Mr. Hudson. Water like this doesn't stay in the hands of amateurs for long." The SUVs rolled away, leaving deep tire tracks in the dust. As soon as they were out of sight, the cooperative farmers erupted in anxious chatter. "They can't take our water, can they?" "Who do they think they are?" She talked like she already owned the place. "What if they go to the county, the state?" "Mark, what do we do?" Mark didn't answer immediately. He watched the road where the SUVs had disappeared, feeling a knot tighten inside him. He had expected challenges. He had expected difficulties. But he had not expected a corporation, a powerful one, to descend on them so quickly, and certainly not with such calculated confidence. "We keep working," he said finally. "We keep building, and we stay together. That's the only way this survives." But even as he spoke, he felt the pressure shifting, rising, like the rumble he'd heard before the sinkhole opened. The next week proved how right he was. One morning, Richard called him, sounding frantic. "Get to the pump," he said. "Now." Mark ran. The sight hit him like a punch. The main pipe leading to the cooperative's first shared field had been cut, not a small, sloppy gash, but a precise, clean slice, done with expensive tools the valley farmers did not own. Water gushed across the dirt in a wide, spreading fan, before being swallowed by thirsty soil. Someone had destroyed hours of labor and wasted precious gallons. As Mark and Richard scrambled to shut off valves and sandbag the spill, the anger in the cooperative began to grow. By afternoon, another sabotage appeared. A storage tank on Janice Mendez's property had been contaminated with oily residue, rendering its contents undrinkable for livestock. The next night, someone left an envelope on Mark's porch. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No words, just a photograph, a picture of the sinkhole. Taken from inside his property line, taken at night. Someone had been watching. Someone had been coming close. Someone comfortable enough to walk his land without fear. Mark brought the photograph to the next cooperative meeting. The room fell silent as everyone looked at it. "We're not just fighting drought anymore," he said. "We're fighting people who don't want us to succeed." Richard nodded grimly. "Then we do the opposite of what they expect." He looked around. "We legalize the cooperative. We file paperwork. We establish rights. We make it harder for anyone to come in and claim what isn't theirs." It was a turning point. No more loose agreements. No more handshakes. It was time to put the valley's survival into ink. Official, binding, real. But even as the cooperative began drafting documents and assigning roles, Mark couldn't shake the feeling tightening in his gut. Clearflow wasn't done. They had only tested the fence. Next time, they'd come for the gate. And he knew, with a certainty that shook him, that the coming battle for the valley's water would be nothing like anything they had faced before. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday, but by sunrise the entire valley felt different. Heavier, charged, like the air before a lightning strike. Word had spread fast. Today wasn't just another gathering of farmers in a repurposed barn. Today was the moment when the valley would decide whether it lived on its own terms or surrendered to the polished boots of Clearflow Industries. Mark arrived early, long before most others. The barn smelled of hay and machine oil, a scent that had lingered from years when the valley was greener, fuller, alive. Now it served as the cooperative's temporary headquarters, papers on folding tables, maps on wooden crates, a borrowed projector humming softly. The well's first legal documents lay neatly stacked on the front table, edges still crisp. Richard paced beside him, jaw tight. "You ready?" he asked. "No," Mark said honestly. "But I'm here." "Good enough." By the time the clock reached 9, trucks and old sedans lined the dirt road outside in uneven rows. Farmers filed in, men with sunburned necks, women with dust on their boots, families who had been hanging by threads long before the well. Toward the center of the room, chairs filled quickly, voices buzzing with nervous energy. Then, right on schedule, the door opened. Clearflow arrived like they expected applause. 3 suits. Expensive shoes sinking slightly into the barn's dirt floor. Evelyn Cole led them again, her expression cool and polished. Today she carried a sleek metal case instead of a paper folder. She looked at the farmers with a soft, practiced smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Good morning," she said. "Thank you for inviting us to participate." No one had invited them. They had shown up on their own authority, as if the valley belonged to them already. Mark felt the tension in the room coil tighter. Cole approached the front and placed her metal case on the table. "Before we begin," she said, "I'd like to congratulate your community. You found something very rare, very powerful, and with the proper guidance, it could elevate your entire region." Richard muttered under his breath, "Here we go." Cole opened the case. Inside were glossy booklets, thick contracts bound with metal rings, and tablets preloaded with Clearflow's pitch materials. As she distributed them to the front row, she continued speaking. "Our proposal remains simple. Clearflow Industries will acquire the well and all related groundwater rights, compensating Mr. Hudson generously. "We're not selling," Mark said, cutting her off. Her smile didn't falter. "Of course not. Not yet. These processes take time. You should at least hear what we offer." She tapped a button on her tablet. The barn lights dimmed. The projector lit up with a crisp, corporate slide deck, maps, graphs, economic projections. It was impressive and predatory. Cole's voice flowed smoothly over the visuals. "Clearflow will modernize distribution, build infrastructure you cannot afford, provide long-term water security for the valley at fixed, sustainable rates. This region is on the brink of collapse. We can fix that." Mark stood in silence, letting her speak. He wanted her overconfidence. He wanted her to show exactly who she was. When she finished, she clasped her hands lightly. "Your cooperative is admirable, but unrealistic. You lack the legal standing, the engineering capability, and the financial resilience to manage a resource of this scale." A murmur of discomfort rippled through the farmers. Cole pressed her advantage. "This well is bigger than one community. It's a regional asset, and regional assets should be managed by professionals." She glanced briefly at Mark. Not amateurs acting on emotion. That did it. Mark stepped forward, hands braced on the table, voice steady. "Are you done?" "For now," she replied. "Good, because we are not amateurs. We are the people who live on this land. We are the ones who've buried livestock in drought years, who've watched our children leave because they saw no future here, who've held on even when the land stopped holding us." He gestured toward the gathered crowd. "No corporation put in those years. We did." Cole tilted her head. "Emotion makes for stirring speeches, Mr. Hudson, but it doesn't pay for infrastructure." "And greed doesn't replace community," he shot back. A few farmers murmured in agreement. Mark reached beneath the table and lifted a small handful of papers. Photographs, printed from the envelope left on his porch. He held them up so everyone could see. "These," he said, "were taken on my land. At night, without permission." The crowd stiffened. They weren't taken by any farmer here. They weren't taken by Carter's crew. They were taken by someone working for Clearflow. Cole blinked once, too slowly. Another photograph, the cut pipe. Another, the contaminated water tank. Another, footprints near the pump. Mark spread the images across the table like playing cards. "We suffered sabotage. Someone cut our lines, sabotaged our storage, watched us, tracked us. And all this happened right after Clearflow arrived." Cole did not flinch, but her nostrils flared ever so slightly. "These accusations are baseless." "No," Mark said sharply. "They're documented, cross-checked, and the sheriff has seen them too." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in collective anger. Years of desperation had carved deep lines into these people. Now those lines hardened into resolve. Richard stepped forward beside Mark. "They don't want partnership. They want control. They want to own something that doesn't belong to them. Not the land, not the water, not us." Another farmer stood. "They want us desperate. Easier to buy that way." Someone else shouted, "We've been desperate long enough." The barn swelled with rising voices, not chaotic, but united. Mark raised his hand. The room quieted. "We are here today," he said, "to vote on the cooperative charter, to make this real, legal, binding. If we pass it, the water becomes communal property, managed by us, protected by us, untouchable by anyone who thinks money can buy our survival." Cole's voice sliced sharply through the air. "You are making a mistake that will cost you your future." "No," Mark said. "This is how we take our future back." He opened the voting box, a simple wooden crate with a padlock. "Farmers of the valley," he said, "cast your votes." One by one they approached. Some walked slowly, shoulders heavy with worry. Others strode forward with fire in their eyes. Hands, rough, calloused, worn, dropped slips of paper into the box. Yes, yes, yes. A few nervous glances, a few more affirmations. Cole stood rigid, watching her influence crumble piece by piece. Her team whispered behind her, tapping frantically on their tablets. But nothing in their screens could change the will of the valley. When the last vote fell, Mark closed the lid. Richard unlocked the padlock. They lifted the top. The papers spilled out across the table, a sea of handwritten votes. Mark counted them slowly, carefully, heart pounding. When he finished, he looked up. "It passes," he said. A breath, collective and sharp, moved through the room. "It passes," Mark repeated louder. "The cooperative is official." Cheers erupted. Not polite applause, not scattered claps, roars. Generations of hardship cracked open into something bright, something fierce. Cole remained still for several seconds. Then she gathered her case, snapping it shut with cold precision. "This isn't over," she said. "You don't know what you've refused." "No," Mark replied calmly. "You don't know what we've built." Her jaw tightened. Then Clearflow turned and walked out, leaving behind only the echo of doors slamming and tires spitting dust. Weeks passed. Clearflow filed complaints, sent letters, tried to challenge water rights at the county level. But the cooperative had prepared. They had lawyers now, not flashy corporate ones, but people who grew up in the valley, who knew the land better than any regulation. They had signatures, ownership maps, geological assessments from Carter's team, legal pathways carved through decades of local precedent. The corporation pushed, the valley held, and slowly, the tide turned, fields greened with new irrigation systems. Livestock recovered. Small crops sprouted from earth that had been little more than cracked stone only months before. Children returned to help plant. Houses long abandoned for work in distant cities lit up again at dusk. Water flowed through the valley not like a commodity, but like a heartbeat. And every dusk, Mark walked the edge of his field, listening to the steady hum of pumps and the soft splash of irrigation channels. One evening, he stopped beside the well, the place where everything had begun. The setting sun painted the land gold, catching the shimmer of moisture on leaves and soil. Richard joined him silently. "Hard to believe," Richard murmured, "that we almost sold this." "No," Mark replied with a faint smile. "Somebody almost bought it. We never really considered selling." Richard nodded, satisfied. "You did good, Mark." "We all did," Mark said. They stood in silence, watching the valley breathe again. Somewhere far off, a tractor engine rumbled. A child laughed. The wind carried the scent of wet soil, rich, alive, hopeful. The land had changed. The people had changed. And Mark Hudson, once a man inches from losing everything, now felt something he hadn't in years. Belonging, purpose, a future. The water kept flowing, and because of that, so would the valley. If this story moved you, don't leave just yet. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and share this video with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments what part touched you the most, and stay with us, because your next favorite story is already on the way.